Picture the ocean at 3 in the morning, when the world sleeps and only the deep remembers. Miles beneath the surface, where sunlight has never touched, the water moves in ancient rhythms currents older than human memory, carrying whispers of what once was. Here, in the crushing darkness, sediment settles like snow over secrets that may never surface. The seafloor stretches endlessly, a moonscape of valleys and ridges that dwarf the Grand Canyon. Occasionally, something catches the sonar's electronic eye. Geometric shapes, too regular for nature, too weathered for recent construction. Marine archaeologists call them anomalies. Others call them hope. In these depths, the boundary between myth and memory grows thin. Every civilization has its flood story, its tale of paradise lost beneath the waves. The Mesopotamians spoke of Dilmun, the Norse of drowned halls, the Celts of Ez vanishing with the tide. But none captured humanity's imagination quite like Atlantis, a name that still quickens the pulse of explorers and dreamers alike. Perhaps it's the way water holds things. Unlike fire, which consumes, or earth, which buries, water preserves even as it conceals. In the Black Sea, archaeologists have found Bronze Age settlements perfectly intact beneath the brine. In the Mediterranean, Roman ships rest as if their crews had simply stepped away for lunch. Water is history's most patient keeper, and its vaults run deeper than we dare imagine. Tonight, as tides pull at shores across the globe, something stirs in the collective unconscious, a longing for the lost city that Plato first described, and that countless others have sought ever since. Whether Atlantis existed in stone and mortar matters less than the truth it represents. That civilizations rise and fall like waves, and that somewhere beneath the surface of everything we think we know, older stories wait to be discovered. The ocean keeps its counsel, but occasionally, in the space between one wave and the next, we catch a whisper of what might have been. Athens, 360 BCE, in the shade of the Acropolis, where marble gleamed white as bone under the Mediterranean sun, an aging philosopher named Plato put stylus to wax tablet and gave birth to the world's most enduring mystery. He was crafting dialogues, imagined conversations between his teacher Socrates and various Athenian nobles, when something extraordinary emerged from his pen. In the dialogue called Timaeus Plato introduced Critias, who claimed his grandfather had heard from Solon, the great lawgiver who had learned from Egyptian priests in Sais that 9,000 years before their time, there existed an island empire of unimaginable power and sophistication. The priests called it Atlantis, and they spoke of it as both wonder and warning. Plato's description unfurled like a fever dream of urban planning. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, lay an island larger than Libya and Asia combined. At its heart rose a city of concentric rings, alternating between land and water, connected by bridges and tunnels of breathtaking engineering. The central island housed a temple to Poseidon, its walls covered in silver and pinnacles capped with gold. Around it, a civilization flourished that made Athens look like a frontier settlement. The Atlanteans commanded bronze and iron when other cultures still knapped flint. They had hot and cold running water, elaborate baths, and docks that could service 1,000 ships. Their armies conquered North Africa to the borders of Egypt, and much of Europe up to the Tyrrhenian Sea. For generations, they ruled justly, guided by wisdom that flowed in their divine blood, for they were descendants of Poseidon himself. But power corrupts even divine lineages. As the generations passed, the Atlanteans grew proud and greedy. They coveted more than they possessed, warred for conquest rather than justice. The gods, witnessing this moral decay, decided to humble them. In a single day and night, earthquakes and floods swallowed the entire island, leaving only an impassable muddy sea where paradise once stood. Modern scholars approach Plato's tale with the cool skepticism that defines their profession. They note that no other ancient source mentions Atlantis. They point out that Plato, often used fictional settings to explore philosophical ideas. The Republic, the ideal state described in another dialogue, being the most famous example. In their view, Atlantis serves as a cautionary tale about hubris and moral decay, a mirror held up to Athens itself, which had recently suffered devastating defeat in the Peloponnesian War. Yet something in Plato's telling resists easy dismissal as pure allegory. The details are too specific, too consistent, too vivid. Either Plato possessed an imagination that wouldn't be matched until Jules Verne, or somewhere in the maze of his sources lay threads of genuine historical memory fragments of something real that time and retelling had transformed into myth. There exists within the human spirit a cartographer's curse, an irresistible urge to fill blank spaces on maps with kingdoms of the imagination. Long before satellites could peer into every corner of Earth, our ancestors populated unexplored territories with wonders. Cities of gold hidden in jungle depths, islands where time moved differently, continents that appeared only to those pure of heart. This compulsion runs deeper than mere curiosity. It springs from a profound sense of loss that seems hardwired into our species' consciousness. Every culture carries some version of the golden age, a time when humans lived in harmony with nature and each other, when wisdom flowed like water, when death itself might have been negotiable. The Greeks called it the Age of Kronos. The Hindus spoke of Satya Yuga. The Judeo-Christian tradition gave us Eden. But where the Golden Age represents temporal displacement paradise, lost in time, Atlantis offers spatial exile. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the dream persists. We cannot return to Eden because time moves only forward, but we might still sail to Atlantis if we could just find the right coordinates. This geography of yearning explains why Atlantis spawned so many siblings in the collective imagination. El Dorado lured Spanish conquistadors deeper into South American jungles with promises of cities roofed in gold. The kingdom of Prester John, a Christian realm supposedly hidden somewhere in Africa or Asia, inspired medieval Europe to dispatch expedition after expedition into the unknown. Shangri-La offered eternal youth in hidden Himalayan valleys, while the Isle of Avalon promised healing and renewal somewhere west of Britain. Each lost world reflects its culture's deepest longings. Atlantis, emerging from Plato's Athens, embodied ideals of perfect governance, technological achievement, and harmonious city planning. El Dorado reflected Spain's gold fever dreams. Prester John answered Christianity's desire for validation in foreign lands. These weren't random fantasies, but psychological maps, charting the territories where hope might still live. Modern psychology recognizes this phenomenon as the Lake Wobegon effect, the tendency to imagine that somewhere else things are better than they are here. But the persistence of lost world myths suggests something more profound, a species-wide intuition that we have fallen from some higher state, that our current condition represents decline rather than progress. Perhaps this explains why Atlantis refuses to stay buried, why every generation rediscovers it anew. In the Renaissance, it validated dreams of perfect societies. In the age of exploration, it justified voyages into uncharted waters. The 19th century reimagined it through the lens of evolution and racial theory. The 20th century made it a haven for advanced technology and spiritual wisdom. The 21st century sees it as a warning about climate change and civilizational collapse. Atlantis endures because it serves as both mirror and map reflecting who we are, while pointing toward who we might become. In seeking the lost city, we search for the lost parts of ourselves. In the beginning, according to countless traditions scattered across the globe, water covered everything. Then came the separation, sky from sea, land from ocean, and life began its tentative emergence onto dry ground. But the waters remembered their dominion, and periodically they returned to reclaim what they had temporarily surrendered. The Mesopotamians, who built their civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, knew floods intimately. Their creation epic older than the pyramids, tells of Utnapishtim, who built an ark to survive divine wrath delivered through rainfall that lasted 6 days and 7 nights. When the waters receded, he sent out birds to search for land, eventually making sacrifice on a mountain peak where his vessel came to rest. Halfway around the world, the Lakota spoke of Maka Aken, the great flood that covered all but the highest peaks. Only a few humans survived by clinging to these islands of stone, later repopulating the world under new covenants with the spirits. In the Amazon, the Amana people remembered when Yalok-Sisipa, the Great Flood, swept away all but a chosen few who rebuilt society from scattered fragments. India's Puranas describe how Vishnu, in his avatar as Matsya the fish, saved humanity from dissolution when cosmic waters threatened to swallow creation itself. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha, sole survivors of Zeus's flood, who repopulated the earth by throwing stones that transformed into people. Even in Australia, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories speak of great waters that reshaped the land, forcing ancestral beings to seek higher ground. These aren't simply stories, they're maps of collective trauma written in the language of myth. Modern geology reveals their possible inspiration. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 11,700 years ago, Earth experienced the most dramatic sea level changes in human history. As mile-thick ice sheets collapsed, oceans rose by more than 400 feet, swallowing coastal plains that had sheltered human communities for millennia. The speed of this transformation would have been catastrophic by human standards, even if gradual by geological ones. Entire coastal civilizations would have faced a stark choice: migrate inland or adapt to an increasingly aquatic existence. Many chose retreat, carrying with them memories of drowned homelands that gradually transmuted into flood myths. Consider the Persian Gulf, once a river valley supporting what archaeologists believe were substantial settlements. As post-glacial flooding filled this depression, creating the body of water we know today, those ancient communities vanished beneath waves that would never recede. Similar submersion occurred in the Mediterranean basin, the Black Sea, and countless river deltas worldwide. But there's another layer to consider: the possibility that some floods were sudden rather than gradual. Recent research into meltwater pulse events suggests that ice sheets sometimes collapsed catastrophically, raising sea levels by several meters in mere decades or centuries. For coastal peoples, such changes would have seemed quite literally apocalyptic, the end of their world arriving with the inexorable certainty of rising tide. In this context, Plato's account of Atlantis gains new resonance. Perhaps the ancient Egyptian priests who supposedly told Solon about the lost island were preserving genuine historical memory, not of a specific city, but of the great drowning that followed the Ice Age when countless coastal settlements joined the realm of legend beneath the waves. 12,000 years ago, Earth wore a different face entirely. Where London now sprawls, glaciers a mile-thick ground slowly southward, carving valleys and pushing before them walls of debris taller than skyscrapers. The English Channel was a river valley where herds of mammoth grazed alongside reindeer and wild horses. The Mediterranean sat lower in its basin, and what we call the Persian Gulf stretched as a green river valley supporting thriving human communities. This was the world of the late Pleistocene, a planet locked in ice, where humans huddled around fires and caves and followed herds across landscapes that would be unrecognizable today. Sea levels stood nearly 400 feet lower than present, exposing vast continental shelves that now lie beneath fathoms of water. Entire continents of land areas larger than modern Australia stretched where now only whales swim. Then, with a suddenness that geology rarely permits, everything changed. The transformation began around 14,700 years ago, when Earth's climate system underwent what scientists call the late glacial maximum. Like a massive air conditioning system suddenly switching to heat, global temperatures began their erratic climb toward modern levels. Ice sheets that had dominated the landscape for over 100,000 years, started their retreat. But not smoothly. The warming came in fits and starts, interrupted by dramatic reversals that could plunge regions back into near-glacial conditions within decades. A most famous of these reversals was the Younger Dryas, a 1,000-year return to Ice Age conditions that began around 12,900 years ago. Climate researchers debate its cause. Some favor a massive influx of glacial meltwater disrupting ocean currents. Others point to evidence of extraterrestrial impacts that may have triggered the cooling. Regardless of mechanism, the Younger Dryas demonstrates how quickly Earth's climate can shift between stable states. When the final warming resumed around 11,700 years ago, the pace of change accelerated dramatically. Ice sheets collapsed, releasing floods of meltwater that raised sea levels in surges called meltwater pulses. Some of these pulses added several meters to ocean heights in mere centuries, catastrophically fast by human standards. Imagine being among the coastal peoples witnessing this transformation. Generations had lived in river valleys, now destined to become bays. Settlements built where rivers met the sea found themselves increasingly isolated on shrinking islands. Traditional hunting grounds vanished beneath waters that never receded. Entire ways of life, perfectly adapted to stable Ice Age conditions, became obsolete within lifespans. The archaeological record from this period tells a story of massive human migrations and cultural disruption. In Europe, the Magdalenian culture sophisticated Ice Age hunters who created some of humanity's earliest art vanished as their mammoth steppe ecosystem gave way to forests and rising seas. In North America, the mysterious Clovis culture disappeared around the same time, along with most of the continent's megafauna. But here's what makes this period particularly relevant to Atlantis legends. Much of humanity's Ice Age development occurred on coastal plains that are now completely submerged. If sophisticated settlements existed on these exposed continental shelves, and there's growing evidence they did, their remains now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water, as effectively hidden as if they had never existed. Recent underwater archaeological discoveries support this possibility. Off the coast of Japan, divers have found what appear to be worked stone structures dating to the end of the Ice Age. Similar finds emerge periodically from the North Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Each discovery suggests that our picture of Ice Age humanity may be incomplete, that more sophisticated coastal civilizations existed than we ever imagined, now sleeping beneath waters that rose to claim them. In this light, perhaps Atlantis represents not pure invention, but distant memory, a fossil of the Great Drowning, preserved in myth long after the waters closed over the last of the Ice Age world. Close your eyes and descend through the Mediterranean twilight, past where modern fishing boats trail their nets, beyond the reach of recreational divers, into depths where pressure builds like the weight of forgotten centuries. Here, if Plato spoke truth, the ruins of humanity's greatest city await discovery, not scattered and weathered like most ancient sites, but preserved in the ocean's perfect darkness. Picture Atlantis as it lived and breathed 9,000 years before Plato's Athens. The city rose from the sea in concentric circles, like ripples frozen in stone and metal. At the outermost ring, a canal 50 stades wide, nearly 6 miles, encircled the entire metropolis, broad enough for the largest ships to navigate with room to spare. This wasn't mere harbor space, but a liquid highway, connecting Atlantis to trade routes that spanned the known world. Moving inward, land and water alternated in perfect symmetry. The first land ring stretched 3 stades across, enclosed by a second canal 2 stades wide, then another land ring 2 stades broad, protected by the innermost canal 1 stade in width. At the center, like the pupil of a vast eye, lay the Holy Island, 1 stade in diameter, where the gods themselves had once walked among mortals. The engineering required for such a city staggers the imagination. Each canal required sophisticated locks or other mechanisms to manage water levels, while bridges spanning the waterways demanded architectural knowledge that wouldn't be matched in our world until the Roman Empire. Tunnels large enough for ships to pass through connected the harbor to the central island. Their construction, implying mastery of underwater building techniques that challenge even modern capabilities. But it was the materials that truly set Atlantis apart from every other ancient city. Where other cultures built in mud, brick, and limestone, the Atlanteans commanded metals that seemed almost mythical. Brass covered their walls, tin sheathed their outer fortifications, and throughout the inner city gleamed orichalcum, a substance Plato described as second only to gold in value, which sparkled like fire and covered the walls of Poseidon's temple. That temple dominated the central island, a structure so magnificent that visitors reportedly wept at first sight. Its exterior walls blazed with silver, while pinnacles caught the light in gold. Inside, the god himself stood portrayed in a chariot, drawn by 6-winged horses, his head nearly touching the ceiling, surrounded by 100 nereids riding dolphins. The entire temple interior pulsed with orichalcum's fiery glow, creating an otherworldly atmosphere where mortal and divine seemed to merge. Yet for all its grandeur, Atlantis wasn't merely ornamental. The city pulsed with practical innovations that wouldn't appear elsewhere for millennia. Hot and cold springs supplied elaborate bathhouses with running water. Sophisticated drainage systems managed both waste and storm runoff. Harbor facilities could accommodate fleets that numbered in the thousands, while arsenals stored weapons for armies that had conquered much of the known world. The agricultural hinterland matched the city's sophistication. Canals and irrigation networks supported intensive farming across the island's 11,000 square mile expanse. Pastures fed enormous herds of cattle and horses, while harbors welcomed tribute ships from colonies scattered across 3 continents. Modern archaeology reveals how ambitious such a description truly was. The Romans, master engineers though they were, never attempted city planning on Atlantis' scale. Venice comes closest, with its canals and water-based transportation, but even Venice covers only a tiny fraction of Atlantis' reported area. The hydraulic engineering alone would have required mathematical and practical knowledge that our own civilization developed only in recent centuries. Perhaps that's the point. Whether Plato intended Atlantis as history or allegory, he created a vision of urban perfection that continues to challenge human imagination. In describing a city too magnificent for its time, he mapped the territories where human ambition might lead if wisdom and power could somehow learn to dance together rather than compete for dominance. The Aegean Sea keeps its secrets well, but sometimes the earth itself cannot resist confession. Roughly 60 miles north of Crete, a crescent of volcanic cliffs rises from waters so deep they seem to drink the light. This is Santorini, known to the ancients as Thera, where, around 3,600 years ago, one of history's most violent volcanic eruptions rewrote the map of Bronze Age civilization. The explosion, when it came, dwarfed most disasters in recorded history. Geological evidence suggests the eruption ejected between 24 and 40 cubic miles of rock, ash, and pumice into the atmosphere, roughly 4 times the material expelled by Krakatoa in 1883, whose sound was heard 3,000 miles away. The Theran blast would have been audible across most of the Mediterranean, while ash clouds darkened skies as far as Greenland and China. But the explosion itself was merely the overture to catastrophe. As the volcanic chamber emptied, the center of Thera collapsed into the void, creating a caldera 12 miles across. The sudden displacement of so much seafloor generated tsunamis that radiated outward at the speed of jet aircraft, carrying walls of water hundreds of feet high toward every shore in the eastern Mediterranean. 60 miles to the south, these tsunami waves struck Crete at the height of Minoan civilization. The Minoans had created something unprecedented in the Bronze Age world, a peaceful, sophisticated culture that ruled the seas through trade rather than conquest. Their palaces at Knossos and Phaistos rivaled anything in Egypt or Mesopotamia, while their art depicted a people who seemed to have achieved something approaching the classical ideal of harmony between human civilization and natural beauty. The waves that struck Crete's northern coast that day erased harbors, destroyed fleets, and penetrated miles inland, carrying away everything that had made Minoan dominance possible. While the civilization limped on for several centuries, it never recovered its former glory. Within generations, the Mycenaean Greeks had filled the power vacuum, establishing the cultural patterns that would eventually give birth to classical Greek civilization. Enter Sir Arthur Evans, the British archaeologist who excavated Knossos in the early 20th century. As he uncovered evidence of Minoan sophistication, elaborate plumbing, beautiful frescoes, apparent gender equality, a culture that seemed to celebrate life rather than glorify war, Evans began to wonder if he had discovered the historical kernel of Plato's Atlantis. The parallels were striking: an advanced island civilization suddenly destroyed by natural catastrophe, surviving only in the folk memory of later cultures. The Santorini-Atlantis connection gained momentum as scholars noted other correspondences. Plato described Atlantis as commanding a maritime empire based on superior naval technology, precisely what archaeology revealed about the Minoans. The Atlantean capital's concentric circular design echoed the geology of Santorini itself, where the collapsed caldera created natural rings of land and water. Even the timing seemed to work. If Egyptian priests had somehow preserved memories of Minoan destruction, and if those memories had undergone the distortions typical of oral tradition, the 1,000-year discrepancy between Minoan chronology and Plato's dates became explicable. Modern volcanology has only strengthened the case. Computer models of the Theran eruption show that its effects would have been felt throughout the eastern Mediterranean, potentially inspiring flood myths across multiple cultures. The temporary climate disruption caused by ash clouds could explain why civilizations from Anatolia to the Levant show signs of stress and collapse around the same period. Yet questions remain. Plato specifically placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Aegean Sea. His city was supposedly much larger than Crete, ruling territories that stretched across multiple continents. The time frame, too, presents problems. Plato's Atlantis flourished 9,000 years before his era, while the Theran eruption occurred only 1,600 years before classical Athens. Nevertheless, the Santorini theory offers something precious to Atlantis researchers: a plausible real-world mechanism by which an advanced Bronze Age civilization could have vanished suddenly enough to inspire legends of divine punishment while still leaving enough traces for later cultures to remember. In the archaeology of Minoan Crete and the geology of volcanic Santorini, the rational mind finds solid ground beneath the quicksand of speculation that surrounds most Atlantis theories. Whether or not Santorini was Plato's inspiration, the Theran eruption demonstrates how quickly even sophisticated civilizations can vanish, leaving behind only puzzles for future archaeologists to decode. At the western mouth of the Mediterranean, where Europe and Africa nearly touch, two massive promontories frame the narrow passage to the Atlantic Ocean. The ancients called them the Pillars of Hercules. Gibraltar to the north, Jebel Musa to the south, and believed they marked the edge of the civilized world. Beyond lay the ocean river, that vast and mysterious sea that encircled all known lands, where monsters swam in eternal twilight, and only the bravest mariners dared venture. Plato was explicit. Atlantis lay beyond these pillars, somewhere in that trackless Atlantic expanse. If we take his geography literally, and many researchers insist we must, then the lost continent cannot be found in the Mediterranean, no matter how compelling the Santorini connection might be. The search must turn westward, into waters that ancient Greeks considered the realm of myth itself. The Atlantic hypothesis has attracted some of history's most fascinating characters. Ignatius Donnelly, a 19th century American politician turned amateur archaeologist, built an elaborate case for a literal mid-Atlantic Atlantis in his 1882 bestseller Atlantis, The Antediluvian World. Donnelly argued that similarities between Old and New World cultures' pyramid building, flood myths, agricultural techniques could only be explained by a common Atlantic homeland that had colonized both shores before its destruction. Modern geology has not been kind to Donnelly's central premise. We now know that the mid-Atlantic ridge is volcanically active, constantly creating new seafloor rather than supporting stable landmasses. The Atlantic Ocean floor contains no evidence of recently submerged continents, quite the opposite, in fact. Core samples reveal deep ocean sediments that have accumulated undisturbed for millions of years. But the Atlantic is vast, and geological impossibility has never entirely discouraged Atlantis seekers. Some researchers have focused on the Azores, those volcanic islands that rise from the mid-Atlantic ridge roughly 900 miles west of Portugal. Here, at least, substantial landmasses exist in the right oceanic region, even if they show no signs of having supported Bronze Age civilizations. The Azores present intriguing possibilities nonetheless. Underwater surveys around the islands have revealed what appear to be artificial structures, stone formations, too regular for natural explanation, lying beneath waters that would have been dry land during the ice ages. If these structures represent genuine human construction, they could date to periods when sea levels were dramatically lower, potentially preserving evidence of sophisticated coastal cultures from the end of the Pleistocene. Further south, the Canary Islands have attracted their own contingent of Atlantis researchers. When European explorers first reached these Atlantic outposts in the 14th and 15th centuries, they found them inhabited by the Guanche people, a mysterious culture with no apparent connection to mainland African populations. The Guanche had fair skin and blonde hair, practiced mummification, and built impressive stone structures, despite having no knowledge of metallurgy or writing. Spanish conquest sadly obliterated most Guanche culture before it could be properly studied, but tantalizing fragments survive. Guanche legends spoke of a great island that had sunk beneath the waves, from which their ancestors had fled to reach the Canaries. Some researchers see in these stories distorted memories of Atlantis itself, preserved by survivors who had escaped the continent's destruction. Even more speculative theories place Atlantis off the coast of Spain and Portugal, where underwater surveys have detected unusual seafloor formations that some interpret as remnants of artificial construction. The continental shelf here was extensively exposed during Ice Age periods, potentially supporting substantial human settlements that would now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water. Each Atlantic location offers the same tantalizing combination: geological plausibility mixed with archaeological uncertainty. Unlike the Mediterranean, where every island and coastline has been extensively explored, the Atlantic still holds unexplored territories, underwater plateaus, and continental shelves where evidence of Ice Age civilizations might yet survive. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but satellite technology and deep-sea exploration continue expanding the boundaries of the possible. If Atlantis truly lies beyond the Pillars of Hercules, somewhere in those vast Atlantic depths, perhaps the 21st century will finally vindicate Plato's explicit geography and reveal what earlier generations could only imagine. Sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries emerge from the most ordinary activities. In 1994, French marine archaeologist Frank Gaudiot was searching for Napoleon's lost fleet in Alexandria's harbor when his sonar detected something unexpected on the seafloor: massive stone blocks arranged in patterns too regular for natural formation. What he had stumbled upon would prove to be one of the ancient world's greatest architectural achievements, lying intact beneath 20 feet of Mediterranean water. The Pharos of Alexandria, built in the 3rd century BCE during the reign of Ptolemy II, had stood as the tallest human-made structure after the Great Pyramid for over a millennium. Rising more than 400 feet above Alexandria's harbor, This lighthouse guided Mediterranean shipping for over 1,500 years, its beacon visible from 30 miles at sea. Ancient travelers ranked it among the 7 wonders of the world, describing 3 distinct levels: a square base, an octagonal middle section, and a circular crown topped by a statue of Zeus or Poseidon. But earthquakes are patient destroyers. A series of seismic events between the 10th and 14th centuries gradually weakened the lighthouse's foundations until finally sometime around 1323 CE, the entire structure collapsed into the very harbor it had protected for so long. The sea that had welcomed countless ships guided by Pharos' light now claimed the lighthouse itself, burying it beneath sediment and centuries of neglect. Gaudio's discovery revealed the Pharos as maritime archaeology's most spectacular prize. Diving teams found not ruins, but a carefully preserved ancient cityscape, complete with sphinx, obelisks, columns, and statues lying exactly where they had fallen centuries before. The lighthouse's massive foundation blocks, some weighing over 70 tons, lay scattered across the harbor floor like pieces of a colossal puzzle, their surfaces still showing the tool marks left by ancient masons. Among the most remarkable finds were statues of Ptolemaic pharaohs and their queens, their faces still clearly recognizable after centuries underwater. A 20-foot granite pharaoh lay on his side, crown intact, as if merely sleeping rather than drowned. Sphinx gazed through the water with expressions unchanged since they last saw. Alexandria's harbor bustling with Roman galleys and Egyptian grain ships. The preservation was extraordinary. While land-based ancient sites suffer weathering, vandalism, and urban development, the sea had protected Alexandria's royal quarter like a time capsule. Archaeologists found complete architectural elements capitals, cornices, door lintels that would have crumbled to dust if exposed to centuries of Mediterranean sun and rain. But perhaps the most haunting discovery was how completely a thriving ancient district could vanish beneath the waves. The entire royal quarter of Ptolemaic Alexandria palaces, temples, harbors, the great lighthouse itself, had slipped beneath the sea so thoroughly that its very location had been forgotten. For centuries, scholars debated where exactly the Pharos had stood, never imagining it lay preserved beneath their feet. The Alexandria discoveries transformed underwater archaeology from treasure hunting to legitimate historical science. Here was proof that sophisticated ancient sites could survive submersion intact, their architecture and artifacts as well preserved as anything on land. More importantly, the finds demonstrated how much of human history might be hidden beneath waters that rose during the millennia following the ice ages. If the Pharos, one of antiquity's most famous monuments, could lie forgotten beneath Alexandria's harbor for 7 centuries, what other cities might sleep undetected beneath Mediterranean waters? The question carries special resonance for Atlantis researchers, offering tangible proof that advanced civilizations can indeed vanish beneath the waves, waiting patiently for modern technology to rediscover what the sea has hidden. Every time archaeologists raise another sphinx from Alexandria's harbor, they prove that the boundary between myth and history is more fluid than we imagine, and that sometimes the most incredible legends hide beneath the most ordinary-looking waters. The Giza Plateau stretches endlessly under the desert sun, its limestone bedrock carved by wind and weather into the foundation for humanity's most enduring mystery. Here, where the Sphinx gazes eternally eastward and the Great Pyramid rises with mathematical precision that still confounds engineers, Orthodox chronology places us in the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, roughly 2580 BCE, when pharaohs named Khufu and Khafre commanded the labor of thousands to build their eternal tombs. But what if this timeline, accepted by mainstream archaeology for over a century, represents only the final chapter of a much older story? What if the monuments of Giza are not the beginning of Egyptian civilization's achievements, but rather the twilight performance of a culture whose origins stretch back into the mists of prehistory, perhaps even to the time when Atlantis supposedly flourished? The questions begin with the Sphinx itself, that inscrutable fusion of human head and lion's body, carved from a single outcrop of bedrock. While Egyptologists credit its creation to Kafur around 2500 BCE, geological evidence suggests a far more ancient provenance. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, examined the erosion patterns surrounding the Sphinx and reached a startling conclusion. The weathering showed clear signs of water damage, not the wind erosion typical of Egypt's arid climate. In Egypt's recent geological history, only one period experienced the intense rainfall necessary to create such erosion patterns, the African Humid period, which ended around 3000 to 4000 BCE. If Schoch's analysis is correct, the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by millennia, meaning it stood already ancient when the first pharaohs unified the Nile Valley. The implications ripple outward like shock waves. If the Sphinx is far older than previously believed, what other assumptions about Egyptian chronology might be wrong? Consider the precision of pyramid construction, which exceeds anything achieved by later Egyptian dynasties. The Great Pyramid's base is leveled to within just 2.1 centimeters, a tolerance that would challenge modern construction techniques. Its sides align with cardinal directions to within 3/60th of a degree, while its interior passages demonstrate sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering principles. How did 4th dynasty Egyptians, allegedly still learning to work with stone, achieve such perfection immediately, without errant developmental stages? Some researchers propose that dynastic Egypt inherited rather than invented its most sophisticated technologies. They point to the inventory stela, an ancient inscription claiming that Khufu ordered repairs to the Sphinx, implying the monument already existed when he built his pyramid nearby. While mainstream scholars dismiss the stela as a later forgery, alternative researchers see it as evidence of Egypt's pre-dynastic inheritance. The mythology deepens this puzzle. Egyptian creation legends speak of the Zep-Tepi the first time, when gods ruled directly on earth, establishing the principles of divine kingship that pharaohs would later claim to inherit. These gods were said to have possessed technologies and wisdom far exceeding anything known to historical periods. Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, supposedly recorded all knowledge in books hidden somewhere in Egypt, waiting for humanity to mature enough to receive their secrets again. Plato's account of Atlantis intriguingly connects to these Egyptian traditions. According to the dialogue Timaeus, Solon learned about Atlantis from priests at Sais, who claimed their temple records went back 9,000 years, precisely to the period that some researchers associate with Egypt's pre-dynastic inheritance. These priests allegedly told Solon that Athens had once been a great power that successfully resisted Atlantean expansion, but that both civilizations had been largely forgotten due to periodic catastrophes that destroyed written records and scattered surviving populations. If we entertain the possibility that some connection exists between Atlantis and pre-dynastic Egypt, several intriguing correlations emerge. Both cultures supposedly possessed advanced hydraulic engineering. Atlantis with its elaborate canal system, early Egypt with sophisticated Nile flood management. Both demonstrated remarkable astronomical knowledge incorporated into their architecture. Both left behind monuments whose construction techniques remain partially mysterious even today. The Edfu building texts, hieroglyphic inscriptions from the Ptolemaic period, describe the founding of Egyptian temples as a recreation of primordial events, following plans supposedly dating to the first time. These texts speak of divine architects who established sacred sites, according to cosmic principles, working with advanced knowledge that later generations struggled to maintain. Could these legends preserve distorted memories of cultural contact with Atlantean survivors who brought sophisticated knowledge to the Nile Valley after their own civilization's destruction? Such speculations remain far from mainstream acceptance, but they highlight how much about Egypt's origins remains genuinely mysterious. The archaeological record shows a remarkably sudden transition from simple agricultural villages to sophisticated urban civilization around 3100 BCE, as if Egyptian culture experienced a rapid infusion of advanced knowledge from some external source. Whether that source was Atlantis, some other lost civilization, or simply the natural acceleration that occurs when cultural innovations reach critical mass, Egypt's monuments continue to pose questions that orthodox chronology struggles to answer satisfactorily. Today, the Sahara spreads across North Africa like a vast ocean of sand and stone, so hostile to life that NASA uses its most desolate regions to test equipment destined for Mars. Temperatures soar above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, while rainfall measures in fractions of inches per year. The desert seems eternal, as if God had simply forgotten to add water when creating this portion of Earth. But satellites peer through sand to reveal a different truth. Beneath the dunes lie the fossil remains of rivers, lakes, and forests that once made the Sahara bloom. 10,000 years ago, during the African humid period, this now barren wasteland supported vast grasslands dotted with lakes the size of inland seas. The Sahara received 20 times its current rainfall, fed by monsoon systems that brought predictable seasonal floods rather than the desperate aridity of today. Where now only the hardiest desert plants survive, acacia woodlands sheltered elephants, giraffes, hippos, and crocodiles. Archaeological evidence reveals that early humans not only survived, but flourished in this green Sahara, developing sophisticated cultures in river valleys that are now buried beneath sand. The transformation was neither sudden nor permanent. Climate operates on cycles within cycles, driven by subtle changes in Earth's orbital patterns that alter the distribution of solar energy across seasons and latitudes. These Milankovitch cycles, named for the Serbian mathematician who first calculated their effects, operate on timescales of tens of thousands of years. When orbital patterns favor stronger African monsoons, the Sahara greens. When they weaken, desert returns. But the shifts aren't always gradual. Recent climate research reveals that the transition from green Sahara to desert occurred with shocking speed, perhaps within centuries rather than millennia. As rainfall decreased past critical thresholds, vegetation died, exposing dark soil to bleaching sun. Light-colored sand reflected more solar energy back to space, cooling the region and further reducing rainfall in a feedback loop that rapidly accelerated desertification. For human cultures adapted to Saharan abundance, this climate shift would have been catastrophic. Archaeological sites across the region show evidence of abandonment around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, as communities that had thrived for millennia found themselves facing an environment that could no longer support their way of life. But where did these displaced populations go? And what knowledge did they carry with them as they fled the advancing desert? Some researchers propose that Saharan refugees migrated to river valleys that maintained water even as surrounding regions dried, principally the Nile in Egypt and the Niger in West Africa. If these climate migrants included sophisticated cultures with advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, or hydraulic engineering, their arrival could explain the sudden flowering of Egyptian civilization around 3100 BCE, or the rise of complex societies along the Niger Bend. The evidence is largely circumstantial but intriguing. Egyptian astronomical traditions show sophisticated understanding of stellar cycles and calendar systems that would have required centuries of careful observation to develop. Pre-dynastic Egypt also demonstrates remarkable hydraulic engineering capabilities, the ability to manage Nile floods through elaborate irrigation systems that maximized agricultural productivity. Could these technologies have originated in the Green Sahara, developed by cultures that had centuries to perfect techniques for managing water resources? Rock art scattered across the Sahara provides tantalizing glimpses of this lost world. At Tassili Nazir in Algeria, ancient artists left thousands of paintings depicting a landscape, unrecognizable today cattle herds wandering through lush grasslands, hunters pursuing game near permanent lakes, elaborate cultural ceremonies conducted in settings that now see rain, perhaps once per decade. Some of these artworks show remarkable sophistication, suggesting that Saharan cultures achieved levels of artistic and possibly technological development that mainstream archaeology has barely begun to investigate. More controversially, some researchers suggest that advanced Saharan civilizations might have possessed knowledge that later influenced both Egyptian and Mesopotamian development. The astronomical alignments found in monuments from Ireland to Peru often show striking similarities, as if they reflect common sources of knowledge about celestial mechanics. If an advanced Saharan culture had mapped the stars during millennia of stable climate, its descendants might have carried this astronomical knowledge to new homes across Africa and beyond as desertification forced migration. The speculation becomes even more intriguing when connected to flood myths found worldwide. If Plato's Atlantis represents a folk memory of climate catastrophe, the drowning he described might be metaphorical rather than literal, referring not to submersion beneath rising seas, but to the drowning of an entire way of life as rains failed and grasslands gave way to sand. The Sahara keeps its secrets buried beneath dunes that shift with every wind, but satellite archaeology and climate research continue revealing fragments of this lost world. Each discovery suggests that our picture of prehistoric human development may be incomplete, that sophisticated cultures arose and vanished in regions we now consider uninhabitable, leaving behind only scattered traces of their achievements and the myths that preserve their memory. Picture Earth 12,900 years ago, emerging from the grip of the last ice age like a patient awakening from fevered sleep. After millennia of gradual warming, the planet seemed poised to enter the stable interglacial climate that would eventually nurture human civilization. Ice sheets were retreating, sea levels rising, and both plant and animal communities migrating northward to reclaim territories that had been locked in permafrost for over 100,000 years. Then, with a swiftness that geology rarely permits, winter returned. The younger Dryas, named for a hardy Arctic flower that suddenly reappeared in European sediment cores, plunged much of the northern hemisphere back into near glacial conditions within decades, perhaps within a single human generation. Temperatures dropped as much as 18 degrees Fahrenheit across Europe and North America. The retreating ice sheets paused in their melting, while glaciers advanced again in mountain regions from Alaska to the Alps. The promising interglacial warming that had begun 14,700 years ago ground to a halt, replaced by 1,000 years of renewed ice age conditions. For the humans and megafauna that had adapted to post-glacial environments, the younger Dryas represented catastrophe on a scale difficult to comprehend. Archaeological evidence suggests that many North American cultures simply vanished during this period, including the sophisticated Clovis people who had successfully hunted mammoths across the continent for centuries. In Europe, reindeer and other cold-adapted species surged southward again, while the forests that had begun to reclaim northern territories gave way to tundra and steppe. But perhaps most mysteriously, when the younger Dryas finally ended around 11,700 years ago, the warming resumed with even greater intensity than before. Temperatures rose rapidly to modern levels and beyond. Ice sheets collapsed in massive pulses that raised sea levels by hundreds of feet, and the familiar interglacial world of the Holocene epoch began. The speed of this final transition may have been even more dramatic than the initial cooling. Geological evidence suggests that some regions warmed by 20 degrees Fahrenheit within decades. What caused such rapid climate shifts has become one of paleoclimatology's most contentious questions. The mainstream explanation focuses on changes in ocean circulation, particularly the disruption of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation that carries warm water northward. According to this theory, massive releases of glacial meltwater into the North Atlantic disrupted the ocean currents that moderate northern hemisphere climate, triggering the return to ice age conditions. But recent research has identified another possible culprit: extraterrestrial impact. Evidence is accumulating for what researchers call the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the idea that Earth collided with fragments of a disintegrating comet around 12,900 years ago. The impact markers are subtle but widespread. Microscopic diamonds formed under extreme pressure, spherules of meteoric metal, and a layer of carbon-rich sediment consistent with massive biomass burning across multiple continents. If confirmed, the impact hypothesis would revolutionize our understanding of both climate change and human prehistory. A cosmic collision capable of triggering the Younger Dryas would have been a truly global catastrophe: wildfires sweeping across continents, impact winters blocking sunlight for months or years, massive species extinctions, and environmental disruption on a scale that would have seemed apocalyptic to any human survivors. This scenario gains particular relevance for Atlantis researchers because it provides a mechanism by which advanced Ice Age civilizations could have been destroyed suddenly and completely. If sophisticated coastal cultures had developed on the exposed continental shelves of the late Pleistocene, and growing archaeological evidence suggests they had the combination of cosmic impact, climate disruption, and rapid sea level rise that followed the Younger Dryas, would have erased them as thoroughly as if they had never existed. Consider the timeline. Plato placed Atlantis' destruction around 9600 BCE, remarkably close to the end of the Younger Dryas, at 9700 BCE. If his dates preserve genuine historical memory rather than arbitrary invention, the correspondence suggests that Atlantis legends might reflect folk memories of the great catastrophe that ended the Ice Age and ushered in the modern world. The megafaunal extinctions that occurred during this period add another layer of mystery. Within a few thousand years, North America lost its mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and dozens of other large species that had survived multiple previous climate cycles. Australia, South America, and Eurasia experienced similar losses, though at slightly different times. Traditional explanations blame either climate change or human hunting pressure, but the speed and scope of the extinctions suggest more catastrophic causes. If cosmic impact triggered the Younger Dryas, it might also explain these mysterious extinctions, the disappearance of Clovis and other sophisticated Ice Age cultures, and the rapid climate changes that reshaped the planet. More speculatively, it could provide the historical kernel around which Atlantis legends crystallized a real global catastrophe that survived in human memory long enough to influence the myths and stories that Plato eventually transmitted to posterity. The Younger Dryas remains an active area of research, with new discoveries regularly challenging existing theories. But regardless of its ultimate cause, this climate event demonstrates how quickly Earth's environmental systems can shift between stable states, and how vulnerable even sophisticated human cultures can be to forces beyond their control or understanding. 50 miles east of Miami, where the Gulf Stream runs like a river through the Atlantic, the Bahama banks stretch beneath waters so clear they seem like liquid air. Here in 1968, archaeologist J. Manson Valentine was following up on psychic Edgar Case's prediction that Atlantis ruins would emerge near Bimini when he spotted something extraordinary beneath his research vessel. A line of massive limestone blocks stretching along the seafloor in formations too regular for nature to have arranged. The Bimini Road, as researchers came to call it, consists of roughly rectangular stones, some weighing several tons, arranged in what appears to be a carefully constructed pathway or foundation. The main formation extends for about half a mile in a straight line before turning at a right angle, creating what looks remarkably like the corner of a massive ancient structure. Additional stone formations nearby create patterns that some interpret as walls, foundations, or harbor works. What captured immediate attention was the precision of the stonework. The blocks fit together with minimal gaps, their surfaces showing what appeared to be tool marks and deliberate shaping. Some stones showed evidence of having been quarried from locations different from their current resting place. suggesting transportation and purposeful placement rather than natural deposition. Carbon dating of organic material found between the stones yielded ages between 2,000 and 4,000 years, far more recent than Plato's Atlantis, but still ancient enough to predate known advanced civilizations in the Caribbean region. More intriguingly, the formation lies in water that would have been dry land during periods of lower sea level, particularly during the late Ice Age, when ocean levels stood nearly 400 feet below current heights. The discovery electrified Atlantis researchers and sparked decades of investigation and controversy. Supporters argued that the Bimini Road represented clear evidence of sophisticated ancient construction in precisely the region where some theories placed Atlantis. The block's regular arrangement, apparent tool marks, and evidence of transportation from distant quarry sites seemed to rule out natural explanations. Skeptics countered that the formation represented nothing more than natural beach rock limestone that had formed along ancient shorelines during periods of different sea level, then broken along natural fracture lines to create the illusion of worked stone. Geological processes, they argued, could account for both the regular spacing and the apparent right-angle turns without requiring human intervention. The debate intensified as underwater investigations revealed additional anomalies around Bimini and throughout the Bahamas. Divers reported finding circular stone formations, apparent harbor works, and even what looked like road systems connecting different formations. Sonar surveys detected geometric patterns on the seafloor that some interpreted as the remains of large-scale construction projects. But the most intriguing discovery came from analysis of the stones themselves. Petrographic examination revealed that while most of the formation consisted of local limestone, some blocks appeared to be composed of different materials, possibly artificial concrete or cement that had been poured and shaped rather than quarried. If confirmed, this would constitute strong evidence for human construction, as natural processes cannot create such material variations within a single formation. Additional underwater structures discovered throughout the Caribbean have added to the mystery. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar surveys have detected what appear to be pyramidal structures and geometric formations at depths that would require them to be far older than any known Caribbean civilizations. Similar discoveries near Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and other Caribbean islands suggest that the region may harbor extensive underwater archaeological sites from periods when sea levels were much lower. The Bimini Road remains officially unexplained. Mainstream archaeology generally dismisses it as natural beach rock, while alternative researchers continue to argue for human construction. Recent advances in underwater survey technology have revealed that the formation is even more extensive than originally thought, with additional alignments and structures visible in high-resolution sonar images. Whether natural or artificial, the Bimini Road demonstrates how much of human prehistory may lie hidden beneath waters that rose at the end of the Ice Age. Even if these particular formations prove to be geological rather than archaeological, they highlight the vast areas of formerly dry land that now lie submerged on continental shelves. Worldwide areas where substantial human settlements could have existed and vanished as completely as if they had never been built. In the crystalline waters off Bimini, where tropical fish swim through formations that might be ancient streets, the boundary between geology and archaeology remains tantalizingly unclear. Stand on any coastline at night when the horizon dissolves into darkness and the sea stretches endlessly beyond the reach of human sight, and consider this: more than 70% of Earth's surface lies beneath waters that remain as unexplored as the far side of the moon. We have mapped Mars in greater detail, and we have charted our own ocean floors. We have sent robotic explorers to Jupiter's moons while leaving vast underwater territories as mysterious as they were to the first mariners who dreamed of sailing beyond the edge of the world. The numbers alone stagger the imagination. Earth's oceans contain over 320 million cubic miles of water, creating a three-dimensional living space larger than all terrestrial environments combined. The average depth exceeds 2 miles, with trenches plunging more than 7 miles below sea level, so deep that if Mount Everest were placed in the Mariana Trench, its peak would still lie a mile beneath the surface. Within this vast liquid realm, pressure builds to levels that crush submarines like tin cans, while temperatures hover just above freezing despite the planet's molten core thousands of miles below. But it's not just the physical vastness that makes the ocean such an effective keeper of secrets. It is the way water preserves what land destroys. On continents, wind and weather erode monuments to dust within millennia. Urban development bulldozes archaeological sites to build shopping malls. Rivers change course, mountains rise and fall, and the patient work of entropy reduces even the grandest civilizations to scattered foundations barely visible from space. Underwater, different rules apply. The cold, oxygen-poor depths that characterize most ocean floors create conditions hostile to the bacteria that normally consume organic materials. Shipwrecks from the age of exploration emerge from abyssal depths with their wooden hulls intact, their ropes and sails preserved as if the crews had abandoned ship yesterday rather than centuries ago. Roman amphorae lie scattered across Mediterranean seafloors, their ceramic surfaces unmarked by the weathering that has reduced contemporary buildings to rubble. The preservation can be so complete, it seems almost supernatural. In the Black Sea, where a layer of hydrogen sulfide prevents normal decomposition, archaeologists have discovered Byzantine ships with their masts still standing, their rigging intact, even their carved decorations clearly visible after 1,000 years underwater. If organic materials survive such treatment, what might remain of stone and metal structures that sank during prehistoric periods? Recent advances in underwater survey technology have begun revealing the scale of what lies hidden beneath the waves. Satellite altimetry can detect underwater mountains and valleys by measuring tiny variations in sea surface height caused by gravitational anomalies. Multi-beam sonar creates detailed maps of seafloor topography, revealing formations that would be invisible to conventional exploration methods. Autonomous underwater vehicles can now explore depths previously accessible only to the most expensive manned submersibles. These technologies have already revolutionized our understanding of underwater archaeology. In the Mediterranean, researchers have discovered entire ancient ports, harbors, quays, warehouses, and residential districts that slipped beneath the waves due to earthquakes and subsidence. The lost city of Heracleion, Egypt's greatest port before Alexandria, was found intact beneath Abu Qir Bay, its temples, and statues lying exactly where they fell when the city sank 1,200 years ago. But such discoveries represent only the tiniest fraction of what may await exploration. Consider that during the last ice age, sea levels stood nearly 400 feet lower than today, exposing millions of square miles of continental shelf that now lies submerged. If substantial human settlements existed on these exposed plains, and growing evidence suggests they did, their remains would now rest beneath hundreds of feet of water, as effectively hidden as if they had been transported to another planet. The Persian Gulf offers a particularly compelling example. During Ice Age periods, this entire body of water was a river valley, a verdant plain crossed by the combined Tigris and Euphrates rivers, with tributaries flowing from the surrounding highlands. Archaeological surveys of the exposed seafloor have revealed ancient riverbeds, fossil beaches, and formations that some researchers interpret as possible settlement sites. If the Gulf supported substantial populations before post-glacial flooding submerged it, those communities would now lie beneath 150 feet of water and millennia of accumulated sediment. Similar scenarios apply to continental shelves worldwide. The Grand Banks off Newfoundland were dry land during Ice Age periods. The Bering Land Bridge that connected Asia and North America supported mammoth steppe ecosystems and the human cultures that hunted there. The Sunda Shelf that once connected Southeast Asia to Indonesia and the Philippines was exposed as a vast tropical plain. Each of these now submerged regions could harbor archaeological sites that would revolutionize our understanding of human prehistory. The ocean's capacity for keeping secrets extends beyond simple submersion. Underwater volcanic activity can bury sites beneath layers of ash and lava. Turbidity currents, underwater avalanches of sediment, can transport and redeposit archaeological materials across vast distances. Tectonic activity can sink land masses to depths where they become inaccessible to current exploration technology. Yet occasionally, the sea surrenders its treasures voluntarily. Storms can uncover shipwrecks that have lain hidden for centuries. Changing currents can expose archaeological sites on the seafloor. Even rising sea levels, which have submerged so much human history, occasionally reveal new mysteries as coastal erosion exposes previously buried materials. As our technology improves and our exploration capabilities expand, the ocean's grip on its secrets gradually loosens. But the scale of what remains hidden continues to humble human ambition. Somewhere in those vast underwater territories, beneath sediments that accumulated while civilizations rose and fell, secrets await that could rewrite the story of human development, including, perhaps, the truth about Atlantis itself. In the grand atlas of human longing, Atlantis does not stand alone. Across the vast Pacific, where volcanic islands rise like stepping stones toward the horizon, 19th century theorists imagined another lost continent, Lemuria, the sunken homeland that supposedly connected Madagascar to India to Malaysia before catastrophic subsidence claimed it for the depths. And scattered throughout Polynesia, where ancient navigators somehow found their way across thousands of miles of open ocean, researchers perceived the remnants of Mu, a Pacific Atlantis whose survivors had fled to mountaintops that became the islands we know today. The story of Lemuria began not with mysticism, but with sound scientific reasoning. Philip Sclater, a British zoologist studying the distribution of lemurs in the 1860s, noticed that these primates existed in Madagascar and India, but nowhere in Africa or the Middle East that supposedly connected these regions. To explain this puzzle, Sclater proposed that a land bridge had once linked Madagascar to India, allowing lemur populations to spread between these areas before the connecting territory sank beneath the Indian Ocean. Sclater's hypothesis gained support from geological evidence that seemed to suggest continental scale subsidence in the Indian Ocean. Similar fossils and rock formations appeared in Madagascar, India, and Australia, implying former land connections. The theory fit neatly with emerging ideas about continental drift and changing sea levels, providing a respectable scientific framework for what would eventually become one of the modern world's most persistent lost continent myths. But science rarely remains purely scientific when it touches on human origins and ancient civilizations. By the 1870s, German biologist Ernst Haeckel had expanded Lemuria from a simple biogeographical hypothesis into the cradle of human evolution, the sunken continent where our species had first developed before spreading to other continents. Haeckel's Lemuria became not just a land bridge for lemurs, but the Garden of Eden of anthropology, the lost paradise where humanity had achieved its first cultural flowering. The transformation accelerated when Madame Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical movement, incorporated Lemuria into her elaborate cosmology of root races and spiritual evolution. In Blavatsky's telling, Lemuria had been home to the third root race spiritually advanced beings who possessed psychic powers and technologies that modern humanity had forgotten. These Lemurians had achieved harmony between spiritual and material development, living in vast cities of crystal and light before cosmic cycles demanded their civilization's dissolution. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, another lost continent was taking shape in the imagination of researchers studying Polynesian culture. Colonel James Churchward, a British Army officer turned amateur archaeologist, claimed to have discovered ancient tablets in India that told the story of Mu, a vast Pacific continent that had supported a population of 64 million people before sinking in a catastrophic volcanic explosion 12,000 years ago. Churchward's Mu resembled Atlantis in many details, but exceeded it in scope. Where Plato's island was merely larger than Libya and Asia combined, Mu supposedly stretched across most of the Pacific, reaching from Hawaii to Easter Island to the Philippines. Its civilization had achieved technological marvels that surpassed even Atlantean accomplishments: flying machines, wireless communication, and energy sources that tapped directly into cosmic forces. The survivors of Mu's destruction, according to Churchward, had fled to the highest mountaintops as their continent fragmented and sank. These peaks became the Pacific Islands that European explorers would later discover, while the refugees became the ancestors of Polynesian, American, and Asian populations. The megalithic monuments scattered across the Pacific region from Easter Island, Moe to the massive stones of Nan Madol in Micronesia, represented desperate attempts by Mu's survivors to recreate their lost homeland as architectural glory. Modern geology has been less kind to Lemuria and Mu than it has been to Atlantis. We now understand that ocean basins are not former continents that have sunk, but rather permanent features of Earth's crust, created by tectonic processes that operate over hundreds of millions of years. The Pacific Ocean floor is volcanic in origin, constantly renewed by seafloor spreading, rather than composed of continental materials that could support large landmasses. The distribution of lemurs and other species that originally inspired Lemuria's creation is now explained by continental drift, the gradual movement of landmasses over geological time that has slowly separated populations that were once connected. Madagascar and India were indeed once joined, but as parts of the supercontinent Gondwana, not by a later land bridge that subsequently sank. Yet the persistence of Lemuria and Mu in popular imagination reveals something important about human psychology and our relationship with the ocean. Like Atlantis, these lost continents serve as repositories for dreams of perfection and explanations for mysteries that conventional history struggles to address. They offer answers to questions that continue to puzzle researchers. How did human cultures spread across vast ocean barriers? Where did sophisticated megalithic building techniques originate? Why do flood myths appear in cultures that had no apparent contact with each other? The Pacific, in particular, presents puzzles that mainstream archaeology has difficulty explaining. Polynesian navigators achieved ocean crossings that European explorers thought impossible, using techniques that allowed them to find islands separated by thousands of miles of open water. The megalithic sites scattered across the Pacific region demonstrate construction capabilities that seem disproportionate to the small populations that presumably built them. Genetic studies reveal that Pacific populations carry DNA signatures suggesting much more complex migration patterns than simple island hopping would produce. Perhaps most intriguingly, Pacific oral traditions from cultures separated by vast distances often contain similar element stories of ancestral homelands that sank beneath the waves, accounts of great floods that reshaped the world, legends of advanced ancestors who possessed knowledge that later generations lost. These shared mythological elements could represent diffusion from common sources, but they might also preserve genuine historical memories of catastrophic events that occurred when sea levels were much lower than today. In the end, Lemuria and Mu serve functions similar to Atlantis. They provide frameworks for organizing mysteries that conventional explanations leave unresolved. Whether these continents ever existed in the forms their proponents describe matters less than the questions they raise about human prehistory and the vast territories that remain unexplored beneath Pacific waters. Among all the marvels that Plato attributed to Atlantis, the concentric rings of land and water, the sophisticated harbor engineering the vast fleets that dominated ancient seas, perhaps none captures the imagination quite like orichalcum, the mysterious metal that allegedly covered the walls of Poseidon's temple and gleamed throughout the island's architecture like captured sunlight. In Plato's description, This substance ranked second only to gold in value, while possessing properties that made it sparkle like fire when light struck its surface. The mystery deepens because orichalcum vanished from the historical record almost as completely as Atlantis itself. Ancient sources mention it sporadically. Homer wrote of orichalcum ornaments worn by gods, while later Roman authors described it as a precious metal used in religious ceremonies, but no definitive identification exists of what this substance actually was. By the time of the Roman Empire, orichalcum had become legendary, a material so rare that some scholars wondered if it had ever existed at all. Modern metallurgy offers several possibilities for what orichalcum might have been. The most straightforward interpretation suggests it was simply a bronze alloy copper mixed with zinc, tin, or other metals to create a golden-colored material that would indeed sparkle like fire when polished. Such alloys were known to ancient metallurgists and could have been precious enough in Plato's time to rank just below gold in value. But recent archaeological discoveries have added intriguing complexity to the orichalcum puzzle. In 2014, marine archaeologists exploring a shipwreck off the coast of Sicily discovered a cargo of metal ingots unlike anything previously found in ancient Mediterranean contexts. Chemical analysis revealed an alloy of copper, zinc, and small amounts of nickel, iron, and lead, a combination that produced a distinctly golden color and unusual metallic properties. The composition matched descriptions of orichalcum found in ancient sources, leading some researchers to suggest that this shipwreck might have preserved actual samples of Plato's legendary metal. The dating of the wreck, approximately 2,600 years old, placed it within the time frame when knowledge of orichalcum supposedly still existed. More intriguingly, the unusual zinc content suggested sophisticated metallurgical knowledge, as zinc is difficult to extract and work with using ancient techniques. The discovery raises fascinating questions about ancient metallurgy and technological capabilities. If the Sicily ingots represent genuine orichalcum, they suggest that Bronze Age metallurgists had achieved greater sophistication than previously believed. The combination of metals required careful control of smelting temperatures and atmospheric conditions, implying organized workshops with specialized knowledge that might have been closely guarded trade secrets. Other researchers have proposed more exotic explanations for orichalcum's mysterious properties. Some suggest it might have been electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver that takes on unusual coloration depending on the proportions of its constituent metals. Ancient sources describe electrum as having magical properties, and its rarity in natural deposits could explain why orichalcum became legendary. Even more speculatively, some theorists propose that orichalcum represented a completely unknown metallurgical achievement, an alloy whose composition involved techniques or materials that were subsequently lost. This possibility gains some support from the fact that ancient metallurgy sometimes achieved results that modern science struggles to replicate. Damascus steel, for example, possessed properties that weren't fully understood until electron microscopy revealed its unique crystalline structure. The symbolic significance of orichalcum in Plato's narrative deserves equal attention to its material properties. In describing Atlantis, Plato created a hierarchy of metals that reflected moral and spiritual values. Gold represented divine perfection. Silver symbolized purity, while ordinary metals like tin and brass corresponded to increasingly degraded spiritual states. Orichalcum occupied the middle ground, precious enough to adorn temples, but not so sacred as to be reserved for gods alone. This symbolic framework suggests that orichalcum might represent humanity's highest technological achievement, sophisticated enough to approach divine capabilities, but still rooted in earthly materials and human craftsmanship. In Plato's allegory, the Atlanteans' mastery of orichalcum could symbolize their civilization's peak moment, when spiritual wisdom and material knowledge achieved temporary harmony before pride and corruption led to their downfall. The search for orichalcum continues to fascinate both archaeologists and metallurgists. Recent advances in analytical chemistry have made it possible to identify trace elements and manufacturing techniques in ancient metals with unprecedented precision. As more Bronze Age shipwrecks are discovered and their cargoes analyzed, the possibility remains that additional samples of this legendary alloy might surface from Mediterranean depths. Whether orichalcum was an advanced bronze alloy, naturally occurring electrum, or something even more exotic, its presence in Plato's narrative serves as a reminder that ancient technological achievements may have exceeded what surviving evidence suggests. In the shimmering surface of this mysterious metal, we catch glimpses of possibilities that challenge our assumptions about prehistoric capabilities and the knowledge that may have been lost when civilizations like Atlantis supposedly vanished beneath the waves. Across the vast Atlantic from Plato's Mediterranean, where Spanish conquistadors would one day encounter civilizations that seemed to spring from fevered dreams, indigenous peoples preserved their own legends of sunken homelands and catastrophic floods. When Hernan Cortes arrived at Tenochtitlan in 1519, he found the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma ruling from a city that rose from a lake like an American Venice, its causeways and canals eerily reminiscent of Plato's description of Atlantis. But it was the stories the Aztecs told about their origins that proved most intriguing to later researchers seeking connections between Old and New World flood myths. The Aztec migration legends spoke of Aztlan, the place of herons, a paradisiacal island homeland somewhere to the northwest of the Valley of Mexico. According to these traditions, preserved in codices that survived Spanish conquest, the ancestors of the Aztec people had lived in Aztlan for generations before receiving divine commands to migrate southward in search of a new home. They would recognize their destined location, the gods promised, by an eagle perched on a cactus growing from a rock, the scene that eventually led them to establish Tenochtitlan on an island in Lake Texcoco. But the Aztlan stories contained darker elements that resonated with flood myths worldwide. Some versions described their ancestral homeland as having been destroyed by water, forcing the survivors to flee across vast distances before finding safety. The parallels to Atlantis were striking enough that Spanish chroniclers like Diego Duran noted the similarities, wondering if indigenous American traditions might preserve memories of the same catastrophic events that Plato had recorded. The Maya, whose classical civilization had already collapsed by the time Europeans arrived, left even more explicit flood narratives carved in stone and preserved in bark paper books. A Popol Vuh, their sacred creation epic, described multiple cycles of world destruction and renewal, with floods playing a central role in the gods' efforts to perfect human creation. In one cycle, the gods destroyed an early race of humans with a great deluge, preserving only a few survivors who became the ancestors of present humanity. More specifically, Maya chronicles contained accounts of ancestral homelands that had been swallowed by rising waters. The Chilam Balam texts compiled during the colonial period, but preserving much older oral traditions, spoke of a land called the first tree of the world that had sunk beneath the sea, forcing survivors to flee eastward to the Yucatan Peninsula. Some Maya communities claimed their ancestors had arrived by sea from a distant land that had been destroyed by flood and earthquake. These flood narratives gained additional credibility from archaeological evidence, suggesting that Maya civilization had indeed been profoundly shaped by water management, both its abundance and its absence. Maya cities like Tikal and Palenque featured sophisticated hydraulic systems that collected, stored, and distributed water through elaborate networks of canals, reservoirs, and drainage systems. The engineering required for these projects rivaled anything achieved in the ancient Mediterranean, suggesting that Maya civilization had developed expertise in water management that could have originated from cultures forced to adapt to catastrophic flooding. The connections between Mesoamerican and Mediterranean flood traditions became even more intriguing when researchers examined the architectural and astronomical knowledge shared by both regions. Maya pyramids, like Egyptian ones, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, with their orientations precisely aligned to solar and stellar cycles. Both cultures developed complex calendar systems that tracked multiple astronomical phenomena with remarkable accuracy. Both built massive stone monuments whose construction techniques remain partially mysterious even today. Some researchers have proposed that these similarities reflect direct cultural contact that survivors from Mediterranean civilizations had crossed the Atlantic to reach the Americas, bringing with them knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and water management that subsequently influenced Mesoamerican development. The timing seems plausible. If Atlantis existed and was destroyed around 9600 BCE, as Plato claimed, survivors could have reached the Americas during the period when Ice Age land bridges and lower sea levels made such voyages more feasible. The linguistic evidence adds another layer of intrigue. Aztlan, the Aztec homeland, derives from the Nahuatl word atl, meaning water, the same root that appears in Atlantic and Atlantis. While this could represent pure coincidence, some linguists have identified other potential connections between Old and New World languages that might indicate ancient contact. The Maya word atl also means water, while their flood deity Chak bears striking resemblance to Mediterranean flood gods in both function and iconography. More controversial researchers have pointed to apparent cultural parallels that seem too specific to represent independent invention. Both Maya and Mediterranean civilizations practiced ritual bloodletting, developed similar concepts of underworld geography, and created artistic styles that some scholars see as related. The feathered serpent deity of Mesoamerica has been compared to similar dragon-like beings in Mediterranean mythology, while flood heroes in both traditions share common narrative elements. Recent discoveries in underwater archaeology have added new dimensions to these speculations. Cenotes natural sinkholes throughout the Yucatan Peninsula have yielded evidence of human occupation, dating back thousands of years, including periods when sea levels were much lower. If rising waters at the end of the Ice Age had indeed forced populations to migrate from flooded coastal areas, the cenotes could have served as refuges where flood survivors preserved cultural knowledge while adapting to new environments. Whether or not direct connections existed between Mediterranean and Mesoamerican civilizations, the flood myths preserved by both regions suggest that catastrophic water-related disasters played crucial roles in shaping human cultural memory. The consistency of these narratives across vast geographical distances implies either shared historical experiences or psychological patterns so fundamental to human nature that they independently generate similar mythological explanations for trauma and displacement. In the ruins of Tenochtitlan, now buried beneath Mexico City, and in the jungle-covered pyramids of Maya cities, echoes of Atlantis continue to resonate reminders that the dream of lost perfection and the memory of catastrophic loss transcend cultural boundaries to become part of humanity's shared inheritance. In the moments before dawn, when the night sky begins its daily surrender to approaching sunlight, ancient monuments across the globe perform their silent choreography with celestial bodies that have danced the same patterns since human consciousness first looked upward and wondered. At Stonehenge, the heel stone frames the rising sun on the summer solstice. At Giza, the Great Pyramid's descending passage points toward the ancient pole star. At Angkor Wat, temple spires mirror the constellation Draco with such precision that the correlation seems impossible to attribute to chance. These alignments suggest that prehistoric builders possessed astronomical knowledge of remarkable sophistication, the ability to track celestial cycles across centuries, predict astronomical events with mathematical precision, and incorporate cosmic geometry into terrestrial architecture. If Plato's Atlantis existed as a real civilization rather than pure allegory, it would almost certainly have shared this ancient preoccupation with stellar mechanics, embedding astronomical knowledge into its concentric rings and towering temples. The precision required for such alignments staggers modern comprehension. The Great Pyramid at Giza aligns with true north to within 3/60ths of a degree, a tolerance that would challenge contemporary surveying techniques. Its internal passages target specific stars with such accuracy that archaeoastronomers can calculate exactly when the pyramid was built based on stellar positions that have shifted due to Earth's axial precession over the intervening millennia. Precession, the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis that causes the positions of stars to drift gradually over centuries, provides the key to understanding how ancient astronomers achieved such remarkable precision. The cycle takes approximately 26,000 years to complete, meaning that stellar positions change noticeably even within human lifespans. To create monuments that remained aligned with specific stars for centuries, builders needed not only precise observational techniques, but also mathematical models sophisticated enough to predict and compensate for precessional drift. This knowledge appears in cultures separated by vast geographical distances and substantial time periods. The Nebra sky disk, discovered in Germany and dating to approximately 1600 BCE, displays constellation patterns and lunar cycles with astronomical accuracy that implies generations of careful observation. Similar star maps appear in Aboriginal Australian rock art, Egyptian tomb paintings, and Maya codices, each demonstrating intimate familiarity with celestial mechanics. But perhaps the most intriguing astronomical alignments appear at sites whose builders remain anonymous. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, massive stone pillars carved with animal reliefs are arranged in circles that align with specific star patterns dating to approximately 9500 BC, remarkably close to Plato's state for Atlantis' destruction. The site predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by more than 5,000, yet demonstrates astronomical knowledge that rivals or exceeds later achievements. If Atlantis possessed the advanced culture that Plato described, its builders would likely have been master astronomers whose knowledge influenced other civilizations. The concentric ring structure of the city itself could have served astronomical functions. The circular canals might have been designed as giant observational instruments for tracking celestial movements, while the central temple's orientation could have marked significant stellar alignments. Several researchers have attempted to reconstruct Atlantis's possible astronomical characteristics based on Plato's geographical clues. If the civilization lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules at approximately 36 degrees north latitude, its astronomers would have enjoyed excellent visibility of both northern and southern star fields. From this location, key constellations like Orion, the Pleiades, and the Southern Cross would have been optimally positioned for observational astronomy. The timing of Atlantis's alleged destruction, around 9600 BC, it gains additional significance when viewed through astronomical lenses. This date corresponds closely to the end of the last ice age, when Earth's axial tilt reached an extreme position in its precessional cycle. Some researchers propose that ancient astronomers were aware of these grand cycles and associated them with periodic catastrophes that reshaped human civilization. The Younger Dryas climate event, which ended abruptly around 9700 BCE, may have been triggered by astronomical factors, either through orbital variations that affected climate patterns or through extraterrestrial impacts that disrupted both climate and stellar observations. If Atlantean astronomers had developed sophisticated understanding of these cosmic cycles, they might have predicted the approaching catastrophe, just as Maya astronomers later calculated that their civilization would face crisis during specific astronomical alignments. More speculatively, some researchers suggest that advanced astronomical knowledge could explain cultural similarities between widely separated ancient civilizations. If Atlantean survivors carried sophisticated star maps and mathematical techniques to other regions after their homeland's destruction, they might have established astronomical traditions that later influenced Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and even Mesoamerican developments. The search for Atlantis has sometimes focused on underwater archaeological sites that display apparent astronomical alignments. Stone formations near Bimini in the Bahamas, megalithic structures off the coast of Japan, and geometric patterns detected on various continental shelves have all been analyzed for possible celestial correlations. While most of these investigations remain inconclusive, they illustrate how astronomical knowledge could survive submersion if builders had incorporated star alignments into their foundations and structural orientations. Whether or not Atlantis existed as Plato described, the global pattern of astronomical alignments in prehistoric monuments suggests that sophisticated, observational astronomy was far more widespread in ancient times than conventional archaeology typically acknowledges. These stellar connections link cultures across vast distances and time periods, implying either extensive cultural diffusion or shared astronomical events that influenced human development worldwide. In the silence between one star's setting and another's rise, ancient monuments continue their patient dialogue with cosmic cycles that dwarf human timescales while somehow remaining intimately connected to our deepest cultural memories and our persistent dreams of lost perfection. In the crystalline waters off Japan's westernmost inhabited island, where the East China Sea meets the Pacific in currents that have flowed unchanged since the Ice Ages, marine geology professor Masahaki Kimura made a discovery in 1986 that would challenge conventional understanding of human prehistory. 25 meters beneath the surface, beyond the reach of casual snorkelers, but accessible to trained divers, a massive stone formation rises from the seafloor like a drowned cathedral, geometric, layered, and seemingly carved by intelligence rather than shaped by natural forces. The Yanaguni monument, as researchers came to call, it stretches over 150 meters in length and rises nearly 30 meters from the ocean floor, its surfaces displaying what appear to be terraces, stairs, walls, and even architectural details like posts and lintels. The largest structure resembles a ziggurat or stepped pyramid, its edges so sharp and its angles so precise that many observers find it impossible to believe natural erosion could have created such forms. Dr. Kimura, who has spent decades studying the formation, argues passionately for human construction. He points to specific features that seem to rule out natural explanations: perfectly vertical cuts in the stone, right-angled corners where different surfaces meet, and what appear to be tool marks on several surfaces. Most compellingly, he has identified formations that look remarkably like architectural elements, stone posts that could have supported roofs, carved channels that might have carried water, and platform areas that suggest spaces designed for human activity. The dating implications are staggering. Based on sea level reconstructions, the Yanaguni monument would have been above water until approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, when post-glacial flooding submerged the coastal plains throughout the region. If the structure is indeed artificial, it would represent sophisticated stone construction predating any known monumental architecture in Japan by many millennia and matching closely the time frame when Plato claimed Atlantis was destroyed. Geological skeptics offer alternative explanations rooted in the sedimentary processes that shape underwater landscapes. The monument consists of sandstone, a material that naturally fractures along predictable lines when subjected to tectonic stress. Underwater currents can erode such formations in ways that create geometric patterns, while marine organisms sometimes leave traces that resemble tool marks. In this view, the Yanaguni monument represents an unusually dramatic example of natural erosion, rather than evidence of prehistoric construction. But additional discoveries around Yanaguni have complicated the purely geological explanation. Divers have found what appear to be carved animal figures, including a stone head that some interpret as representing a human face. More formations with similar geometric characteristics have been located at other sites around the island, suggesting a pattern of unusual underwater structures rather than a single geological anomaly. The cultural context adds another layer of intrigue. Yonaguni lies at the intersection of ancient migration routes that connected Japan to the Asian mainland during periods of lower sea level. Archaeological evidence shows that sophisticated cultures existed throughout the region during the late Pleistocene, including peoples who created elaborate stone tools and cave art. If these cultures possessed architectural capabilities greater than previously believed, Yonaguni could represent a surviving example of their achievements. Recent underwater surveys using advanced sonar and photogrammetry have revealed that the monument is even more complex than initially realized. Three-dimensional mapping shows multiple levels of terracing, internal chambers, and connecting passages that create an integrated architectural complex. Some researchers interpret these features as evidence of purposeful design, while others see natural cave systems that have been modified by erosion. The academic debate over Yonaguni reflects broader tensions within archaeology about how to interpret ambiguous evidence. Mainstream scholars emphasize the importance of applying Occam as razor, preferring simple natural explanations over complex cultural ones unless the evidence clearly demands otherwise. Alternative researchers argue that orthodox archaeology systematically underestimates prehistoric human capabilities, dismissing inconvenient discoveries that challenge established chronologies. Yonaguni has become a pilgrimage site for researchers investigating possible connections to Atlantis and other lost civilizations. Some theorists propose that the monument represents physical evidence of the advanced Pacific civilization known as Mu, while others see it as confirmation that sophisticated cultures existed worldwide during the period when Ice Age flooding reshaped coastlines and displaced prehistoric populations. The monument's continued submersion beneath 25 meters of seawater ensures that investigation remains difficult and expensive, limiting the number of researchers who can examine the evidence firsthand. Most analysis depends on underwater photography and video footage, which cannot capture the subtle details that might definitively resolve questions about natural versus artificial origin. Whether the Yonaguni monument represents prehistoric architecture or unusual geology, its existence demonstrates how much human history may be hidden beneath waters that rose at the end of the Ice Age. In the Pacific alone, vast areas of continental shelf were submerged as sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, potentially concealing evidence of sophisticated cultures that thrived in coastal environments now lying far beneath the waves. As marine archaeology technology continues improving, discoveries like Yonaguni remind us that the ocean floor may harbor architectural achievements that predate any monuments currently visible on land, stone testaments to human ingenuity that wait patiently in the depths for recognition and understanding. Picture the moment when the last citizens of Atlantis realized their world was ending, not gradually, through the slow decline that claims most civilizations, but suddenly, catastrophically, with earthquakes splitting the earth and waters rising faster than anyone could flee. In Plato's account, the destruction took only a day and a night, barely enough time for the wisest and most fortunate to gather their most precious possessions and escape to higher ground. But what happened to those survivors? Where did they go? And what traces of their advanced knowledge might they have carried to distant shores? The question has captivated researchers for centuries, generating theories that stretch across continents and cultures. If Atlantis existed as more than allegory, its destruction would have scattered refugees across the ancient world, carrying with them fragments of sophisticated knowledge that might explain the sudden flowering of civilization in places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Americas. These survivors could have served as catalysts, introducing advanced techniques to less developed cultures and accelerating human progress in ways that conventional archaeology struggles to explain. Egypt presents the most tantalizing possibilities for Atlantean influence. The sudden appearance of sophisticated hieroglyphic writing, advanced mathematical concepts, and monumental architecture around 3100 BCE has long puzzled historians. Earlier Egyptian cultures showed gradual development in art and agriculture, but the technological leap required to build the pyramids seems to have occurred with remarkable speed. Could this acceleration reflect the arrival of refugees from a more advanced civilization survivors who brought with them knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and hydraulic management that had been perfected over millennia in their sunken homeland? The ancient Egyptian texts themselves hint at such external influence. The Turin King List and other royal chronicles speak of the followers of Horus, mysterious figures who supposedly ruled Egypt before the first historical pharaohs, establishing the principles of divine kingship and sacred architecture that later dynasties would inherit. Some researchers interpret these references as folk memories of Atlantean survivors who had integrated into Egyptian society, becoming the wise counselors and master builders whose knowledge enabled the Old Kingdom's greatest achievements. Similar patterns emerge in Mesopotamia, where the Sumerian civilization appeared around 3500 BCE with sophisticated city planning, advanced metallurgy, and the world's first writing system. Sumerian myths speak of the Anunnaki beings who came from across the waters to teach humanity the arts of civilization. While mainstream scholars interpret these figures as gods in the conventional mythological sense, alternative researchers wonder if they might represent historical memories of advanced refugees who had fled from catastrophic floods in their original homeland. The evidence becomes even more intriguing when we examine cultural practices that appear suddenly in multiple regions without clear developmental stages. The technique of mummification, for example, appears in Egypt, the Canary Islands, and South America with similar methods and materials, despite the vast geographical distances involved. Advanced astronomical knowledge shows up simultaneously in cultures that had no apparent contact with each other. Megalithic construction techniques, the ability to quarry, transport, and precisely position massive stone blocks appears worldwide during the same general time period. Could these widespread similarities reflect the influence of Atlantean survivors who had scattered across the unforeseen globe after their homeland's destruction? The timeline works. If Atlantis was destroyed around 9600 BCE, as Plato claimed, survivors would have reached other continents during the critical period when human cultures were transitioning from hunter-gatherer societies to more complex civilizations. Their advanced knowledge could have provided the technological foundation that enabled this transition to occur more rapidly than natural cultural evolution would typically permit. The genetic evidence adds another dimension to these speculations. Recent DNA studies have revealed that human populations underwent significant migrations during the period immediately following the last ice age. These movements were more complex than simple geographical expansion. They involved the mixing of previously isolated populations and the rapid spread of genetic variants that had originated in distant regions. While genetics cannot prove the existence of Atlantis, the patterns it reveals are consistent with large-scale population movements that could have included refugees from catastrophic flooding. Some researchers have focused on the curious distribution of certain cultural symbols and architectural motifs that appear in widely separated ancient civilizations. The spiral, the cross, and various astronomical symbols show up in contexts from Ireland to Peru, often with similar meanings and associations. While these could represent independent invention or normal cultural diffusion, they might also indicate common origins in the knowledge systems that Atlantean survivors carried to their new homes. The oral traditions of indigenous cultures worldwide contain remarkably consistent elements that some researchers interpret as garbled memories of Atlantean influence. Stories of wise strangers who arrived by sea to teach advanced techniques appear in the mythologies of cultures from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. These figures are typically described as having lighter skin, superior knowledge, and godlike abilities characteristics that could describe technologically advanced refugees encountering less developed populations. Even more speculatively, Some theories propose that Atlantean survivors established secret societies or mystery schools, dedicated to preserving their advanced knowledge through the catastrophic period that followed their homeland's destruction. The similarities between ancient mystery traditions in Egypt, Greece, and other cultures might reflect their common origin in Atlantean wisdom teachings that were passed down through carefully selected initiates over many generations. Whether or not such direct connections existed, the pattern of cultural development that followed the end of the Ice Age suggests that human civilization received some form of acceleration during this critical period. The transition from Stone Age hunter-gatherers to sophisticated urban cultures occurred more rapidly than archaeological models typically predict, implying influences that remain incompletely understood. In temples carved from living rock, in astronomical alignments that track celestial cycles with mathematical precision, in flood myths that echo across continents, the possible legacy of Atlantean survivors continues to surface tantalizing hints that our understanding of human prehistory may be incomplete, and that somewhere in the scattered fragments of ancient knowledge, the wisdom of the lost continent still influences our world. In the cool marble halls of universities worldwide, where academic careers are built on careful methodology and evidence-based reasoning, the overwhelming majority of scholars approach Atlantis with the same skepticism they would apply to any extraordinary claim lacking extraordinary proof. Their case against a literal interpretation of Plato's narrative rests on foundations as solid as the archaeological evidence they demand. No physical remains have ever been definitively identified as Atlantean. No contemporary sources corroborate Plato's account, and the entire story fits too perfectly into known patterns of philosophical allegory to be accepted as historical fact. The chronological problems alone, argue mainstream historians, should put the matter to rest. Plato claimed that Atlantis existed 9,000 years before Solon's time, approximately 9600 BCE by modern reckoning. But this places the lost civilization in the Mesolithic period, when human cultures were primarily composed of small hunter-gatherer groups armed with stone tools and living in temporary settlements. The technological sophistication Plato attributed to Atlantis' elaborate metallurgy, massive construction projects, sophisticated naval fleets, simply did not exist anywhere in the world during the time period he specified. Archaeological evidence from the Mediterranean and Atlantic regions during the 10th millennium BCE reveals no trace of the advanced civilizations that would have been necessary to support Atlantean society. No Bronze Age technology, no monumental architecture, no urban settlements of the scale Plato described. The tools found from this period are flint knives and bone harpoons, not the bronze weapons and golden ornaments that supposedly filled Atlantean armories and temples. The settlements are caves and temporary camps, not the vast circular cities with their elaborate canal systems and towering walls. More fundamentally, skeptics point out, Plato himself provides the most compelling evidence against literal interpretation. Atlantis appears nowhere in his earlier works, despite ample opportunity for such momentous historical material to surface in dialogues explicitly concerned with ideal governments and social organization. The story emerges only in his late period, in works where Plato was clearly experimenting with using fictional narratives to explore philosophical concepts. The literary structure of the Atlantis dialogues reinforces this interpretation. Timaeus and Critias follow established patterns that Plato used elsewhere when creating allegorical settings. Detailed, vivid descriptions that serve to make abstract concepts concrete and memorable. The Republic, perhaps Plato's most famous work, creates an entirely fictional ideal state for similar purposes. Why should Atlantis be treated differently simply because Plato set it in the remote past rather than an abstract future? Contemporary Greek sources provide no corroboration for Plato's claims. Aristotle, Plato's own student and intellectual successor, dismissed Atlantis as Plato's invention, noting that he who created it destroyed it. If any genuine historical tradition about Atlantis had existed, it surely would have been known to other educated Greeks of the classical period. Yet the story appears exclusively in Plato's work, suggesting that it originated with him rather than being drawn from independent sources. The Egyptian connection that Plato claimed for his narrative also fails to withstand scrutiny. While ancient Egypt did maintain extensive historical records, no genuine Egyptian source mentions anything resembling Atlantis. The supposed priests of Sais, who allegedly told Solon about the lost continent, left no trace of this remarkable knowledge in Egyptian literature, religious texts, or royal chronicles. Given Egypt's meticulous record-keeping and their evident pride in preserving ancient traditions, this absence seems difficult to explain if the Atlantis story had genuine Egyptian origins. Geological evidence provides perhaps the strongest case against Atlantis, as Plato described it. The Atlantic Ocean floor shows no signs of recently submerged continents. Core samples from deep-sea sediments reveal continuous deposition over millions of years, with no evidence of the massive disruption that would have accompanied the submersion of a continent-sized landmass. Plate tectonics explains the structure of ocean basins through processes that operate over hundreds of millions of years, leaving no room for the rapid submersion that Plato's narrative requires. Even if we accept more modest interpretations, that Atlantis might have been a smaller island or coastal civilization, rather than a vast continent, the physical evidence remains lacking. Underwater archaeology has made tremendous advances in recent decades, revealing ancient harbors, sunken cities, and prehistoric settlements that were submerged by post-glacial sea level rise. But none of these discoveries matches the scale, sophistication, or time period that Plato specified for Atlantis. The cultural diffusion arguments that some researchers use to support Atlantean influence on other civilizations can be explained more simply through normal processes of trade, migration, and independent invention. Similarities between ancient cultures often reflect common human responses to similar environmental challenges rather than shared origins in a lost mother civilization. The appearance of agriculture, metallurgy, and urban planning in multiple regions during roughly the same historical period follows predictable patterns of cultural development rather than requiring external influences from Atlantean survivors. Professional archaeologists emphasize that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The existence of an advanced Bronze Age civilization in the Atlantic Ocean predating known Bronze Age cultures by several millennia would represent one of the most significant discoveries in human history. Such a revolutionary finding would require physical evidence that meets the same rigorous standards applied to all archaeological claims: stratified deposits, radiocarbon dating, artifact analysis, and peer review by qualified specialists. To date, no such evidence has emerged. Underwater formations like those near Bimini or off Yonaguni remain geologically ambiguous at best, while supposed Atlantean artifacts have invariably proven to be either natural formations, known archaeological materials, or outright hoaxes. The scientific method demands that hypotheses be abandoned when they fail to generate testable predictions, or when simpler explanations account for the same evidence more effectively. In the end, argue the skeptics, Atlantis serves humanity better as a philosophical symbol than as a pseudo-historical obsession. Plato's narrative offers profound insights into the nature of political power, moral decay, and civilizational collapse lessons that remain relevant regardless of whether the events he described ever occurred. By seeking to literalize his allegory, modern Atlantis enthusiasts may actually diminish its value, trading profound philosophical wisdom for speculative archaeology that leads nowhere except away from genuine understanding of both ancient history and human nature. As night settles over the Mediterranean and stars emerge in patterns that Plato himself once contemplated, the eternal question resurfaces like tide returning to familiar shores. Does it matter whether Atlantis ever existed? In libraries and laboratories, in diving expeditions and archaeological surveys, In the fertile imaginations of countless dreamers across the centuries, the search continues, not merely for a lost city, but for something deeper, more essential to the human condition. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Atlantis story is not whether it happened, but why it persists. Empires rise and fall, leaving behind scattered stones and fragmentary inscriptions that scholars labor to decipher. But Atlantis, existing only in Plato's words, has proven more durable than bronze, more precious than gold, more compelling than any ruins yet discovered. It survives because it addresses needs that transcend historical curiosity, our longing for lost perfection, our fascination with civilizational collapse, our hope that somewhere in the vast territories of the unknown, wisdom waits to be rediscovered. The search for Atlantis has driven genuine discoveries that justify the quest regardless of its ultimate success or failure. Marine archaeology exists as a serious scientific discipline, partly because Atlantis seekers funded early underwater expeditions that revealed the ocean's capacity to preserve human history. The sophisticated civilizations uncovered in the Mediterranean from Minoan, Crete to submerged Alexandria emerged from searches that began with Atlantean speculation. Even if Plato's specific island never existed, the broader questions his narrative raised about lost civilizations and catastrophic climate change have proven remarkably prescient. Modern climate science reveals that Earth's environmental systems can indeed shift between stable states with the sudden violence that Plato attributed to Atlantis' destruction. The Younger Dryas event, only recently understood, demonstrates that global climate can reorganize within decades, transforming landscapes and destroying civilizations with efficiency that would have seemed mythological to earlier generations. Rising sea levels threaten coastal cities today, just as they may have claimed Ice Age settlements, whose existence we can only infer from scattered traces. The technological capabilities that seemed impossibly advanced in Plato's description of Atlantis' sophisticated hydraulic engineering, precise astronomical observations, globe-spanning trade networks have become routine features of our own civilization. From this perspective, Atlantis appears less as fantasy than as prophecy, a vision of what human societies might achieve when knowledge and power align productively rather than destructively. But the most profound insights that emerge from contemplating Atlantis concern not technology, but wisdom, the recognition that no human achievement, however magnificent, can guarantee permanence. The same intelligence that creates marvels also generates the pride and overreach that destroy them. The same mastery over nature that enables civilization also creates the capacity for environmental destruction. The same organizational abilities that build great cities also concentrate power in ways that corrupt their builders. Contemporary archaeology has revealed enough about genuine lost civilizations to confirm that Plato's basic insights were sound, even if his specific details were fictional. The Maya achieved remarkable sophistication in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture before their classical civilization collapsed due to environmental degradation and political failure. The Anasazi built elaborate cities in the American Southwest, then abandoned them when climate change and resource depletion made their settlements untenable. Easter Island's inhabitants created one of the world's most mysterious monument complexes, then suffered societal collapse when their ambitions exceeded their island's carrying capacity. Each of these real-world examples echoes themes present in Plato's Atlantis narrative, the rise of sophisticated cultures that achieved remarkable technological and artistic heights before succumbing to environmental pressures, resource limitations, or internal contradictions. The difference between these documented cases and Atlantis lies not in plausibility, but in preservation. We have physical evidence for Maya cities and Anasazi settlements because they were built on land that remained stable. If similar civilizations developed on Ice Age coastlines that were subsequently submerged, their remains would be as effectively hidden as if they had never existed. The search for Atlantis thus becomes a meditation on impermanence, and the fragility of human achievement. Every great civilization believes itself eternal, yet archaeological evidence reveals an endless succession of rises and falls, achievements and collapses, brilliant innovations followed by tragic forgetting. The Roman Empire, which seemed invincible to its citizens, survives mainly as scattered stones and linguistic fragments. The sophisticated hydraulic civilizations of Central Asia, which sustained millions of people for over a millennium, vanished so completely that their existence was forgotten until satellite archaeology rediscovered them in recent decades. From this perspective, Atlantis serves as both warning and comfort. The warning reminds us that no civilization, regardless of its achievements, can take permanence for granted. Environmental change, resource depletion, political corruption, or simple hubris can destroy in decades what took centuries to build. But the comfort lies in recognizing that human creativity and wisdom persist even when specific societies fail. Knowledge may be lost, but it can also be rediscovered. Civilizations may fall, but new ones arise to carry forward the essential human project of understanding and improving our condition. The dream of Atlantis endures because it embodies both aspects of this human story: the magnificent achievement and the inevitable loss, the soaring ambition and the humbling fall. Whether or not Plato has specific island ever existed matters less than the universal truths his narrative illuminates about the nature of civilization itself. In seeking Atlantis, we seek ourselves, both our highest potentials and our deepest vulnerabilities. As long as humans build cities and wonder about their fate, as long as we gaze at the ocean and imagine what lies beneath its waves, as long as we dream of perfection while acknowledging our imperfections, Atlantis will continue to call to us from beyond the horizon, not as a place to be found, but as a mirror in which to see ourselves more clearly, not as a destination, but as a journey toward understanding the magnificent, fragile, endlessly renewable project of human civilization. If you've found yourself captivated by this exploration into humanity's most enduring mystery, consider joining others who share this fascination with the unknown, territories that still await discovery in our ancient past.